There are moments when God sends a warning long before we understand the danger approaching. For an FBI agent and his loyal German shepherd, that warning began the night the dog died, then breathed again with someone else's memories. A forgotten brother, secret organization, and a message recorded by a man the world believed was gone. Every clue pulled them deeper into a truth, darker than anything they had ever faced. And when the little girl whispered that she saw a man behind the dog, one who looked exactly like the agent, everything shifted. Something hidden was waking inside the shepherd, guiding them toward a revelation no one was prepared for. What do you think is waiting for them next? Leave your thoughts, like the video, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform to follow this journey. Salt Ridge Airport was never silent in the morning. It breathed. You could hear it in the rolling wheels of suitcases, the clipped footsteps of late travelers, the endless announcements drifting across the ceiling like restless ghosts. But on this winter day, the noise seemed distant to FBI K-9 Agent Owen Rourke, a 45-year-old man with a broad frame, tired, blue-gray eyes, and the kind of stillness found only in someone who had already survived the worst thing life could do to a human being. The faint streaks of silver in his brown hair caught the terminal lights as he walked, and his gloved hand briefly touched the silver angel necklace hanging beneath his cold-weather navy jacket. His daughter's last gift before the accident that took her away. Beside him moved Atlas, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat and a distinctive silver lightning-shaped patch on his chest. His amber eyes flicked sharply with intelligence. But there was something deeper there, too. Something almost human in the way they softened at Owen's voice. Atlas had survived battles, storms, and missions that had broken lesser dogs. But not once in those years had he forgotten the night he lay beside Owen in a dark hospital corridor, both of them grieving the same child. That night had carved a permanent scar on Atlas's muzzle and on Owen's heart. Today, Atlas walked alert but calm, sniffing the passing air without tension, until his ears twitched. A shiver rippled down his spine, his head snapped left, his body froze. Owen felt the leash tighten. Atlas? But Atlas didn't respond. He stepped forward as if pulled by a gravity no one else could feel. Travelers parted instinctively, sensing urgency in the dog's tense shoulders and trembling breaths. Then, Atlas released a sound no one in the terminal had heard from him before. He howled. It was not the howl of warning, nor the howl of aggression. It was the cry of a creature remembering grief so old and so deep it had never truly healed. The cry echoed off the glass walls like a wound reopening. Owen's chest tightened. That sound. The last time Atlas had howled like that was the night Owen lost his daughter. Atlas lunged toward the conveyor belt where luggage rolled out in steady rhythm. A line of passengers gasped as the dog jumped onto the metal edge and planted himself in front of a red suitcase. Old, dented, the zipper strained from misuse. The dog lowered his head until his nose brushed the fabric. His breathing hitched, then broke into a desperate whimper. Owen's instincts sharpened instantly. He moved fast, kneeling beside Atlas. "What is it, boy? What do you—" Atlas pawed the suitcase, not scratching, not ripping, touching, carefully, as if terrified of hurting what might be inside. The transportation officer shouted, "Sir, step back. We need the bomb unit." But Atlas suddenly turned and growled, a low, trembling rumble, not at the officer, but at the idea of being stopped. Owen lifted his badge. FBI K-9 agent. The dog's behavior isn't matching explosives or chemical alerts. "What is he detecting?" the officer demanded. Owen swallowed. "Something alive." He didn't wait for approval. Atlas pressed his body against the suitcase and nudged the zipper with his snout, whining with frantic urgency. Owen pulled the zipper. The sound was small, just metal teeth parting, but it sliced the silence clean open. When the lid flipped back, a wave of cold air and fear rolled out. Inside was a little girl, no more than 2. Her skin was pale as fallen snow, her lips tinged blue, her tiny wrists marked with faint bruises. Loose curls of light brown hair stuck to her cheeks. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. She looked like someone had folded her life into this suitcase and hoped she'd disappear. Owen reached in with hands that suddenly shook. He had carried a child like this once before. Atlas leaned in, sniffing gently along the girl's cheek, then gave a soft, trembling nudge, his amber eyes filling with something heartbreakingly human. Recognition of fear, fragility, and loneliness. Her small chest fluttered, a shallow breath. "She's alive," Owen barked. Paramedics were called. People rushed. But the world felt narrowed to a pinpoint. Owen, Atlas, and the child lying between fate and memory. As Owen lifted her from the suitcase, her thin fingers brushed his jacket. Something slipped out. A pink teddy bear, worn and softened by time. Owen froze. That toy. It looked exactly like the one his daughter used to sleep with. The same floppy ears, the same stitched smile. The one firefighters told him had burned in the car. His throat closed. For a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe. Atlas touched the bear with his nose and whimpered. The little girl stirred, eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze was foggy, unfocused, until she saw Owen. For one surreal second, she smiled weakly. "Daddy?" The word struck like a blow. Owen's grip faltered. "No, sweetheart, I'm not..." Before he could finish, her face twisted in fear. Her tiny hand clutched his collar. "Don't let her find me." "Who?" he whispered. "Her." The girl's breath wavered. "Mommy said, she's coming." She collapsed against his chest. Owen held her, stunned into stillness, as Atlas pressed himself against both of them, growling low at something no one else could see. A moment later, a paramedic checked the suitcase again and frowned. "There's something taped under the lining." He pulled back the fabric, revealing a sealed medical file stamped with a red warning label. "Project Dawn. Do not open." Atlas snapped. The dog lunged, teeth bared, barking in a way Owen hadn't heard since the night of the accident. His entire body was rigid with terror. Passengers recoiled. Officers stepped back. Owen grabbed the file, but the moment his fingers touched it, Atlas shoved his head under Owen's hand, whining, as if begging him not to open it. The paramedic whispered, "Agent, what's wrong with your dog?" Owen didn't know, but he felt this in his bones. Whatever Project Dawn was, whatever the girl was running from, whatever Atlas sensed, it wasn't just danger. It was personal. Paramedics finally took the child, securing oxygen around her small face. Owen followed close, refusing to let her out of his sight. Atlas stayed pressed to his leg, every step tense, protective. As they reached the ambulance, the girl stirred again. Barely conscious, she whispered one more word, so soft Owen nearly believed he imagined it. "Sarah." He froze. That was his daughter's name. Atlas nudged him and whined, a long, aching sound, as if the past and present had collided in his chest. Before Owen could make sense of anything, the paramedic called out, "Agent Rourke, we need you to sign..." The rest of the sentence never reached his ears, because inside the open suitcase, resting where the girl had been moments before, was a second document, one that hadn't been visible earlier. A birth tag. The name printed on it felt impossible. Sarah R. The same first name, and the same initial as Rourke. A chill crept up Owen's spine. Atlas growled softly in agreement, pressing against him as if bracing him for a truth neither of them were prepared to face. And somewhere behind them, unnoticed, someone watched from the mezzanine above. A shadow that stepped back into the darkness the moment Owen looked up. As the ambulance doors closed, Owen felt Atlas lean heavily into his leg, trembling. "Easy, buddy," he whispered, though his own voice wavered. He didn't know whether he was comforting the dog or himself. One thing was certain: the suitcase was only the beginning. And the past Owen thought he had buried was clawing its way back to him. If this chapter touched you, if you believe in second chances, in grace, and in miracles found in the darkest places, please like, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Your support helps these stories of faith, courage, and redemption continue. The hospital wheels screeched as the gurney burst through the double doors, the fluorescent ceiling light streaking past in a frantic blur. Owen Rourke moved beside it in long, urgent strides, one hand gripping the side rail, the other unconsciously brushing the silver angel necklace at his chest. An old habit he barely noticed anymore. His face, rugged and weather-worn from years in the FBI, had gone pale beneath the lines carved by grief and sleepless nights. His eyes, usually sharp and ice-steady, flickered with something rawer now. Fear, the kind that reaches into a man's ribs and twists. Atlas ran beside him, his paws clapping in sync with the stretcher wheels. The 6-year-old German shepherd, built strong with a black and tan coat and that unique silver lightning-shaped patch on his chest, kept his head low, ears pinned back. Anyone watching could tell he wasn't just doing his job, he was guarding someone. His deep brown eyes locked on the tiny girl on the stretcher, trembling with a kind of instinctive ache he didn't understand but couldn't ignore. The little girl's breathing was shallow, fluttering like a candle struggling in the wind. Her curly light brown hair stuck to her damp forehead. Her skin, nearly translucent under the harsh lights, made her look like she could vanish if someone blinked too hard. A nurse tugged the thin cream blanket around her shoulders, and even through the fabric Owen could see the faint bruises around her wrists. Bruises shaped like hands too large for her world. "BP's dropping again," a paramedic muttered. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too many last breaths. "Get respiratory in here now." Owen's jaw clenched until his teeth ground together. She was in a suitcase. His voice was low but shaking beneath the weight of the words. A child in a suitcase. "We'll do everything we can, Agent," a female doctor said. She was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, her hair pulled into a tight bun that showed the streaks of gray she'd earned with years in trauma wards. Dr. Hayes, that's what her badge read. Her tone was firm, practiced, compassionate, but unshakably direct. The kind of woman who didn't have room in her life for lies or excuses. They rolled the girl into an ER bay. Atlas tried to follow, but a nurse stepped in front of him. "No animals. She stays." Owen's voice cracked like breaking ice. The nurse froze. Something in Owen's eyes, the grief, the fire, the trembling desperation, made her step aside. Atlas moved in without hesitation, positioning himself at the foot of the gurney. A silent sentinel. As the medical team worked fast, removing the child's dress, sticking electrodes on her tiny chest, adjusting oxygen flow, Owen stood by helplessly. The gurney lights flickered over the faded pink sleep dress she wore, revealing something else beneath the fabric. Thin, surgical scars across the small of her back. Dr. Hayes leaned in, frowning. "These aren't accidental." Owen swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "These look deliberate, medical, Recent. She exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. What kind of procedure leaves marks like this on a toddler? Atlas whimpered, a soft, broken sound that made one of the younger nurses pause. The dog's nose pressed toward the child's tiny hand, tail low, eyes shimmering with an emotion too human to dismiss. And then, the girl moved, just barely, a twitch in her fingers. One nurse gasped. "Doctor, she's responding." Her eyelids fluttered. A thin, trembling whimper escaped her lips. The room hushed. Even the machines seemed to quiet themselves, as if waiting. Her eyes opened. Dull, unfocused blue. Blue that mirrored another child's eyes Owen once knew better than his own reflection. His heart lurched, ribs tightening around a memory he never wanted to revisit. The girl looked past the lights, past the faces, past the fear, and her gaze landed on Owen. For a moment, she stared at him like she was seeing something impossible. Her lips parted. A sound scraped out, so soft he almost thought he imagined it. "Mommy." Her voice shook. "Mommy, don't leave me again." A nurse instinctively reached for her, but Owen lifted a hand and shook his head. He stepped closer, leaning into her line of sight. His voice was barely a whisper. "You're safe now. I promise." The girl blinked weakly, like she was trying to understand the shape of his voice. Her tiny chest rose, fell, rose again. Her lips trembled. Then she spoke one more word, a single word that hit Owen like a blow. "Sarah." The room narrowed around him. Sound blurred. For a split second he felt dizzy, the kind of dizzy where years of buried pain suddenly claw their way back to the surface. Sarah. His daughter's name. His dead daughter's name. A name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in almost a decade. Atlas rose stiffly, staring at Owen with wide, alert eyes. He stepped close and nudged Owen's hand, soft, grounding, pleading, as if reminding him to breathe. Just then, the heart monitor beeped sharply. The girl's hand shot out, straight toward Owen's necklace. Her fingers curled around the small silver angel pendant with a strength impossible for her condition. The lights above flickered, and the girl whispered, barely audible, "Mommy said, find the angel." Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into unconsciousness. Dr. Hayes barked orders again. "Keep oxygen steady. Prep for imaging. Let's go, people." The room surged back into motion. But something had changed. Every nurse, every doctor, every one of them kept glancing at Owen, as if he somehow held part of the diagnosis they couldn't find. Owen took a slow breath. His hands trembled. He shoved them into the pockets of his jacket before anyone noticed. He couldn't fall apart here, not in front of strangers, not in front of Atlas, not in front of this broken child who spoke a dead girl's name. As the team stabilized her, Owen pulled the cream blanket back over her shoulders. Something prickled the fabric. A tag. Someone had sewn it into the lining. He frowned, gently turning the edge. A name stared back at him in stitched red thread. Sarah R. Rourke. His last name. His throat tightened until he thought it might close completely. He staggered back a step, gripping the rail of the bed for support. The air tasted metallic, thick, impossible. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not." Atlas growled, quiet but unmistakable. A low protective rumble, not at the child, not at the doctors, at the label, at the name, as if he recognized it. A nurse walked up, a young man with freckles and kind eyes. "Agent Rourke, are you all right? You look—" "I'm fine," Owen said too quickly. His voice cracked on the line. Dr. Hayes approached. "Agent, this child needs a guardian on record until we identify her. We'll require your statement shortly." Owen didn't respond. His eyes stayed locked on that tag. "Rourke, Her name was stitched like she belonged to him, like someone wanted him to find her, wanted him to remember, wanted him to feel this knife where it hurt most. Atlas rested his head on Owen's thigh, steady, warm, loyal. Through the chaos, the dog stayed still as stone, his gaze fixed on the little girl as if guarding a truth he wasn't ready to reveal. Owen leaned down and whispered, "Stay with her." Atlas obeyed instantly. Dr. Hayes cleared her throat, gently but firmly. "Agent, did you say the child called you something earlier?" Owen shut his eyes. She said Sarah." Hayes froze. Nurses glanced at each other. One finally said what they were all thinking. "Is that your daughter's name?" Owen didn't answer, because he couldn't. The world around him had already tilted too far. The overhead lights flickered again. The girl twitched on the bed, just once. Her lips moved, shaping a silent word. Atlas lifted his head sharply, ears pricking. And for a brief, impossible moment, the heart monitor spiked the exact rhythm of a heartbeat Owen once memorized, his daughter's. Then it flattened back into its normal pattern. No one else noticed. But Atlas did. And Owen did. As the medical team prepared to transfer the girl to imaging, Owen finally stepped aside, hands still shaking. He forced himself to think rationally, to be who he was trained to be. But his heart refused to behave like an agent's heart. It behaved like a father's. He stared at her one last time before they rolled her away. Her small fingers remained wrapped around his angel necklace, the chain taut, as if she refused to let it go, even in unconsciousness. He whispered, voice breaking, "Who are you, sweetheart? Who sent you to me?" Atlas nudged him, eyes soft but troubled. Owen looked down, whispering the fear he couldn't say out loud to anyone else. "She can't be my daughter. She can't." But the silence gave no reassurance, and neither did the tag sewn into her clothes. Sarah R. As the medical doors shut, a nurse placed a clipboard into his hands. "Agent Rourke, whenever you're ready, we'll need your official account." Owen stared at the form without seeing a word, because somewhere in his soul, in that place that never truly healed, something whispered back to him, "Find her." Atlas's low growl rumbled again as Owen lifted the clipboard. The story was only beginning, and somewhere in the hospital halls, unseen, a woman's silhouette paused, watching, waiting, her breath shaking as if she wanted to speak his name, but couldn't risk being heard. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Because even in the darkest places, God still sends his miracles. The hospital corridor had barely stopped trembling from the chaos of the emergency. Yet a new storm was already walking toward Owen. Footsteps, soft, uneven, like someone carrying a grief too heavy for her bones. When Owen turned, he saw a woman, thin, pale, trembling, clutching a worn tote bag to her chest as if it were the last warm thing on earth. Her name was Elena Hart, 33 years old, long brown hair tied loosely but still falling in shaken strands around a face that had forgotten how to rest. Her eyes were the worst part, brown, exhausted, hollowed by nights of crying, yet holding a flicker of hope that could break a man's heart just by looking at it. She whispered, Where is my daughter?" Owen didn't speak immediately. His instinct, sharpened by years of interrogation, wanted to look for lies. But the truth was already there, written in the way her shoulders caved inward as though she expected the world to punish her. Atlas stepped forward first. The German shepherd, 6 years old, black and tan coat marked by a streak of silver on his chest, approached Elena slowly. No growl, no caution, just a soft, aching whine. He nudged her trembling hand, and then he licked it. The entire hallway froze. Atlas never did that, not unless the person in front of him carried a wound deeper than any physical harm. Owen's breath tightened. This woman, whatever else she was not the threat. She was something far sadder, someone who had lost too much already. Elena pressed both hands to her mouth. Tears spilled before she could stop them. I didn't kidnap her, she whispered. I swear, I only tried to save her. Owen's voice remained low. Start from the beginning. Elena nodded, though it looked like her neck barely had strength to hold her head up. A woman came to me, she said. I don't know her name. She wore a coat, white, like a doctor. Her gaze drifted as though reliving the moment. She placed the little girl into my arms and said. Elena swallowed hard, repeating the words exactly. Name her Sarah, and don't let the FBI touch her. Owen's heart stalled. Sarah, the name of his own daughter. The world tilted for a second. Atlas suddenly turned his head toward the empty hallway. His ears locked forward. His whole body stiffened, not in fear, but recognition. He took 2 slow steps toward thin air, then stopped and whimpered. The same whimper he used the night Owen buried his daughter. As if something familiar had just passed through the corridor. Something neither human nor entirely gone. Owen whispered, Atlas, what did you see? Atlas didn't move, didn't blink. He stared at nothing, yet behaved like he was staring at someone he remembered. The hair on Owen's arms rose. Elena pulled a crumpled paper from her tote bag. I wasn't supposed to show this, she said, hands shaking so hard the note nearly slipped. But you need to see it. Owen unfolded the paper. 6 words, slanted handwriting, barely legible. This child must live. Do not tell Owen. His blood ran cold. Someone out there knew him, knew his name, knew his past, knew exactly what would break him. Someone wanted him close to this child, but not close enough to understand why she existed. Owen forced his voice steady. Elena, who gave this to you? Elena wrapped her arms around herself, as if the memory alone could bruise her. I told you, she whispered. A woman in a coat. I never saw her face. But she spoke softly, like someone who'd loved the child before. Like someone who didn't want to let her go. Her voice cracked, and she said she was being hunted. Before Owen could respond, a shout cut down the hallway. Agent Rourke, you need to see this. 2 nurses rushed over with a tablet, faces pale, hands trembling. It's the security footage, one of them said, from the pediatric wing. Owen took the tablet, pressed play, a grainy video, Elena crying on a bench, Atlas lying beside her, nurses walking by. And then, a tall figure appeared at the end of the hall. A woman, hair long, coat white, stance familiar. She stood there for 5 seconds, watching Elena, watching Atlas, watching the place where the little girl lay, unconscious. Her face blurred by distance, but her silhouette unmistakable to Owen. Elaine, his wife, the woman he buried 10 years ago, the woman who should not be alive. And just as quickly as she appeared, she turned and vanished down the hallway without a single camera catching where she went. Owen's hands shook. Atlas pressed against his leg, whimpering again. Someone alive was pulling all the strings, someone who knew them, someone who once belonged to them. If you believe in miracles, in grace, and in the way God guides even the darkest paths, please like comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform to follow the journey ahead. The room was darker than it needed to be. Monitors lined the wall like a silent jury, each screen frozen on a different angle of the airport. Lines of timestamps glowed in the corner. Radio chatter hummed faintly behind glass. Owen Rourke stood in the center of it all. Shoulders squared, jaw tight. His navy FBI jacket creaked softly when he moved, the old fabric worn in all the places where years of work had bent him. The silver angel pendant on his chest tapped once against his shirt with every breath, a small sound only he seemed to hear. Atlas lay at his feet, not resting, not quite. The 6-year-old German shepherd held his head high, ears pricked, amber brown eyes locked on the largest screen in front of them. The black and tan coat along his shoulders rippled as muscles tensed. The lightning-shaped silver streak on his chest caught the screen light every time he shifted. "Run it again." Owen's voice was low, flat, but the agent at the console knew better than to argue. Jenna Price, mid-30s, with sharp cheekbones and tired eyes, framed by dark curls pinned into a messy bun, tapped keys with quick, practiced motions. She wore a plain blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry, no nonsense. Years in digital forensics had made her blunt and precise, the kind of woman who believed in data more than in people. The footage rewound. The crowd moved backward in fast motion, rolling suitcases sliding upstream like salmon, arms and legs unwalking their own steps. "Now," Owen said. The video slowed. Normal time returned. They watched the baggage drop area. A family moved out of frame. A businessman checked his watch. A janitor pushed a cart. Nothing unusual until she stepped into view. The woman in the hoodie. She wasn't tall, not short either. Maybe 5'6", slight build, moving with a strange combination of caution and purpose. The gray hoodie was pulled low over her face, dark jeans tucked into worn sneakers. She pushed the red suitcase like it carried glass instead of cloth. A careful, reverent motion that didn't fit with someone dumping a bag. "Pause," Owen said. The frame froze as the suitcase rolled to a stop. "Zoom." Jenna narrowed her eyes, fingers flying. The image grew grainier, then steadier as the software cleaned edges and sharpened contrast. The woman's face stayed hidden in shadow, but her posture told its own story. Shoulders hunched, chin tucked, one hand gripping the handle, the other pressed to her side like she was shielding something invisible. "She never tags it," Jenna muttered. "Doesn't talk to staff. Doesn't even look up at the counter." From behind them, Marcus Hale grunted. Marcus was in his early 50s, built like an old oak tree that had taken lightning more than once and refused to fall. His gray hair was shaved close, deep lines carved from years of leading field teams through the worst humanity had to offer. He crossed thick arms over his chest. "Guilty people don't like cameras," he said. "Smart, guilty people like them even less." Owen didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off the way the woman placed the suitcase on the belt. She didn't drop it. She didn't shove it. She set it down as if it could feel, as if there was a heartbeat inside. His own fingers twitched. He remembered lifting the lid. The weight of the little girl in his arms, the cold of her skin, the feel of the pink plush bear brushing his knuckles. "Play," he whispered. The woman stepped back. For a moment she stood still, one hand still resting lightly on the suitcase handle. Then she let go, turned, and walked away without looking back. Atlas's tail flicked once against the floor. His eyes followed the blurry shape as it slipped out of frame. Owen exhaled, a rough scrape of air. "Different angle," he said. Jenna nodded. She switched feeds. Another camera, another view. The woman again, entering from a side door, the hoodie catching the light. People brushed past her without seeing her at all. She moved like someone who had practiced being invisible. Then it happened. A gust of air from an opening door lifted the edge of her hood. Just for a second, less than a breath. The camera caught it anyway. "Freeze it," Owen said. The frame snapped still. Zoom. Jenna worked in silence. The edges blurred, then sharpened. The grain fought back, but the algorithm won. The side of the woman's neck filled the screen. Pale skin, a few stray dark hairs. And there, just above the collar of the hoodie, a small scar, shaped like a snowflake. Owen's heart stopped. His hand slid up, touching his own neck in the exact same place, fingers finding nothing but skin and cold memory. He knew that shape. He had kissed the edges of that scar once upon a time. Elaine had gotten it as a teenager, a freak accident with falling ice and broken glass. She'd laughed about it when she told him the story, called it her winter tattoo. He used to trace it with his thumb when she fell asleep on his chest. No one else he'd ever known had a scar like that. His chest tightened so hard for a moment he thought he might pass out. Behind him, Atlas let out a low sound. Not a growl, not quite a whine. It was something in between, pulled from deep in his chest. The dog rose from the floor, claws clicking as he moved closer to the screen. He stood in front of it, head tilted, ears pinned back, tail held low. Then he lifted his muzzle and howled. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was raw, torn from the same place that had made him cry out on the day Owen lost his family. The sound slid under the skin of everyone in the room. Marcus's jaw clenched. Jenna's fingers stilled on the keyboard. One of the younger techs in the back crossed himself under the desk. Owen's throat burned. For 10 years, Owen had believed God had gone silent. He had stopped praying the night they told him his little girl wasn't coming back, stopped asking, stopped expecting answers. If heaven existed, it felt like a closed door. But now a dog was howling at a woman who should be dead, at a scar that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, at a frame of video that said, in silent pixels, "Nothing is as buried as you think." For the first time in years, a thought slipped through the walls he had built. What if this isn't an accident? What if someone was still weaving threads he couldn't see? Atlas stepped closer, pressing his nose to the glass, fogging the image of the scar. His body trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. Like every instinct in him was saying, "She belongs to us." The moment passed, but it did not let go. "Could be coincidence," Jenna said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Scars repeat, patterns repeat, faces. Not this one." Owen cut in quietly. Marcus studied him. The older man's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. He had been there the day the car was pulled from the ravine. He had seen the crumpled metal. He had watched Owen fall apart in a hospital corridor. "You're telling me you think that's Elaine," Marcus said. He didn't ask it as a question. Owen's jaw clenched. The muscles twitched. "I'm telling you," he said, "that scar doesn't belong to a stranger." Silence settled. Even the radios outside seemed to dim. Finally, Jenna cleared her throat. "There's more," she said. "You should see this." She switched to a new feed. A different angle in the terminal. The escalator bank. People riding up and down, bags bouncing behind them. The frame shook slightly from distance, the colors a little faded. "Here," Jenna murmured. "Watch under the escalator." They watched. Nothing at first. A kid dropped a toy. A couple argued. An elderly woman leaned on her cane. Then, in the shadowed space beneath the metal steps, a figure appeared. A woman. She wasn't in a hoodie now. Instead, she wore a long, pale coat, simple and clean, with a scarf wrapped around her neck. Dark hair fell loose past her shoulders, slightly wavy, the way someone's hair gets when they stop caring about styling and just walk through weather. Her face was angled away from the camera, but her posture, the slight forward lean, the way her hand held her own opposite elbow, as if hugging herself. Owen felt the air thin. The woman stood there, under the escalator, watching something beyond the frame. Jenna rewound, played, slowed. "It's you," she said softly. "She's watching you." The camera panned slightly as it auto-tracked the crowd, and for half a second, Owen saw himself in the far corner of the screen, standing with Atlas near the security checkpoint, looking in the opposite direction. Under the escalator, the woman in the pale coat did not move. She watched him. Then, as if sensing the camera, she stepped backward into the shadows and disappeared. The feed rolled on, now showing strangers again. 3 seconds, Jenna whispered. She was there for 3 seconds. "Long enough," Marcus said. "You see enough to know it's not a ghost." Owen stared at the frozen frame. He felt hollow and overcrowded at the same time. Possibilities collided in his mind, none of them safe, none of them kind. If Elaine was alive, she had stayed hidden for a reason. If someone else had that scar, they were playing a cruel game with a dead man's memories. Atlas shifted against his leg, pressing close, anchoring him. "We track her through the rest of the cameras," Owen said finally. His voice steadied with effort. "Every entrance, every exit, every blind spot. She doesn't just vanish." Jenna nodded, already queuing up more feeds. Marcus stepped out to coordinate with airport security. The room came to life with movement again. But for Owen, the world had narrowed to one simple truth. The past had just walked across his present, and it was leaving footprints. Hours later, the evidence room felt like a different planet. No chatter now, no glow of multiple screens, just one overhead light casting a pale cone over a metal table. On it lay the red suitcase. Empty now, its monstrous secret transferred to a hospital bed somewhere across town. Beside it sat a clear plastic bag containing a plush pink bear, worn thin around the ears. The threads along one arm were starting to come loose. Someone at intake had labeled the bag with a simple tag: "Victim's personal effect." Victim. Owen's hand hovered over the bag without touching it. His chest ached. He could still see Emma, his real Sarah, the way she'd been the last morning he'd seen her, hair messy, bear tucked under one arm, sleepy grin tilted sideways. Atlas paced the length of the room, nails ticking on the concrete. The dog's head swung between the suitcase, the bear, and the door, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. "Easy," Owen murmured. "We're just thinking." In the corner of the table lay the thin folder he'd pulled from the suitcase earlier. "Project Dawn. Do not open." The red block letters were slightly smeared, like they'd been stamped in a hurry. He had opened it, of course. The contents were worse than the label. Clinical notes, data tables, medical jargon twisted around phrases that had no business being near children's names. Words like adaptation, failure, termination. He'd slammed it shut before he threw up. Atlas stopped pacing and stared at the folder now. His ears lowered. The silver streak on his chest rose and fell with each sharp breath. He took one step forward, then another, until his nose was almost touching the edge of the file. And then he did something he had never done in an evidence room. He growled, not a warning to an intruder, not a low rumble of suspicion. It was a quiet, shaking sound, as if he was growling at the paper itself, at the words, at every invisible hand that had hurt small bodies and called it research. Owen swallowed hard. "You and me both, partner," he whispered. "You and me both." His phone buzzed on the table. A single vibration, sharp in the silence. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number, no contact name. Just a string of digits that meant nothing. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the preview. One line of text, 3 words, "She is alive." A cold rush ran through his veins. He unlocked the phone. The full message appeared. "She is alive. Stop digging." Below the text was an image file. His thumb hovered for a heartbeat before he tapped it. The photo filled the screen. A little girl sat on a park bench, sunlight caught in her hair. She was maybe 7, her legs too short to touch the ground, shoes swinging in midair. She clutched a familiar pink bear to her chest, its fabric worn in the same places as the one in the evidence bag. Her face was a knife made of memory. Same gray-blue eyes, same crooked smile, same little dimple in her left cheek when she almost laughed. Emma. His Emma. The age she was never supposed to reach. The timestamp on the photo was less than a year old. Atlas moved closer, pressing his head against Owen's arm. The dog's breath came fast, eyes flicking between the phone and his handler's face. Owen's knees nearly buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table to stay up. Someone was watching him. Someone knew where his dead daughter had been. Someone was telling him to back away from the very thing his soul refused to stop chasing. In the harsh white light of the evidence room, surrounded by metal and paper and plastic, one stubborn thought rose from the rubble inside him. If the devil was sending messages, then maybe, just maybe, heaven hadn't finished speaking either. He closed his eyes for half a second, barely daring to call it prayer. "Lord," he whispered under his breath, "if you're still here, I'm going to need you." Atlas leaned his weight fully into Owen's side, as if to say he wasn't going anywhere. Outside, somewhere in the dark veins of the city, a woman with a snowflake scar was moving further away. Inside, in a hospital bed, a little girl with the wrong name and the right bear was fighting to keep breathing. And in this small room, a man who thought he had already lost everything realized he was only standing at the edge of what God might be about to reveal. If you believe that even in the darkest investigations, God can still work quiet miracles through broken agents and loyal dogs, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform to walk this journey with us. The address was nothing more than a half-erased number on a loading dock sign, buried behind a strip of forgotten warehouses on the edge of the city. Wind pushed trash along the cracked asphalt like it was trying to erase the place from memory. Owen Rourke pulled the unmarked FBI SUV to a stop, his hand still tight on the wheel from the drive, his jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. Atlas sat in the back seat, dark and tan fur rising and falling with steady, controlled breaths. The 6-year-old German shepherd watched his handler through the metal mesh. Amber brown eyes, calm but bright, with a focus that never really turned off. His black K9 harness, stamped with K9 Unit, Atlas, looked almost too clean for the places destiny kept dragging them into. Owen cut the engine and listened to the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, like a room full of people holding their breath. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, smelling like rust, oil, and something faintly chemical. He stepped out, tall frame unfolding with the slow stiffness of a man who had taken too many falls for too many years. His Navy FBI cold weather jacket brushed against the butt of his holstered weapon. Under it, his gray sweater clung to a body that was still strong, but carried the wear of grief and time. He moved to the back and opened the rear door. Atlas hopped down, landing softly on big paws, head lifting, nose working. The dog looked up at Owen, eyes searching his face for direction and, maybe, for the ghost that never left him. "You smell it too, don't you?" Owen murmured. His voice was low, tinged with a roughness that came from not just years of command, but years of talking to the dead in his head. He took out a scrap of paper, the copied address linked to Project Dawn in the confiscated file. He didn't need to reread it. The words were already etched into his mind. Project Dawn, Children Who Survive. The locks on the warehouse were old but not untouched. Fresh scratches scarred the metal as if someone had been in and out recently. Owen's fingers moved with the certainty of habit. A click, a twist, a shove of the heavy door. The smell inside hit them first. Dust, mold, bleach, and under it all something sterner. The sterile tang of medical equipment that had no business being here. Owen flicked his flashlight on. The beam sliced through the dark. Atlas stepped in first, harness shifting across his shoulders, head low, tail level. Not afraid, not relaxed. Working. The inside of the warehouse was divided into crude sections, with metal shelving and makeshift partitions. On one wall, a long wooden board had been nailed up at kid height. Lines and dates were scraped in marker, one above the other, like someone had been measuring height over time. Next to each line were initials, some crossed out, some circled, some with nothing at all. Owen felt his chest tighten. "Height charts," he whispered, "like you do for your kid, on a kitchen wall." Only this wasn't a kitchen. It was a graveyard with the lights turned off. Atlas padded ahead, nails clicking faintly on the concrete. He sniffed at a stack of plastic tubs, nose pausing at one before moving on. The tubs were labeled with codes, not names. DO1, DO2, D3. Dawn. Project Dawn. Owen found a metal cart in the middle of the floor, covered with files. He moved closer, flashlight tracing the edges of manila folders, old coffee rings on the metal. X-ray films hung crookedly from a string overhead, like ghosts suspended mid-scream. They were child skulls, some marked with white arrows and notes. Target area. Abnormal response. Failed adaptation. His stomach turned. The words didn't feel like medicine. They felt like cruelty written in neat handwriting. He reached for the top file. Subject, ER. His heart skipped, those initials carved into his soul. Emma Rourke, his daughter. His little girl who liked pink shoes and sticky ice cream and falling asleep on his chest during stormy nights. His fingers trembled as he opened the file. Grainy black and white photos, medical notes, charts of vitals, handwritten comments, high resilience to stress, unstable physiological responses. Terminated after critical incident. Subject failed. Owen blinked. For a heartbeat, the room blurred. Atlas pressed his side lightly against Owen's leg, the dog's warmth anchoring him to the present. Terminated, Owen whispered. They wrote terminated like she was a test batch. Like she was expendable. His throat locked. The flash of the car accident, metal, fire, sirens, someone yelling that it was too late, rushed back with violent clarity. But now another picture tried to push in. A picture of his daughter, not in a burning car, but in a sterile room, under white lights, surrounded by strangers holding clipboards. Atlas made a sound then. Not a bark, not a whine. Something between. A low, vibrating moan that rose from deep in his chest, as if he too could see what Owen saw. The dog lifted his head and stared at the hanging X-rays, then back at Owen with eyes that seemed to ask a question that the man didn't know how to answer. For a moment, The flashlight beam landed on something small at the base of the wall. A faint, childish drawing done in dull crayon. A stick figure man, taller than the others. Next to him, a dog with big ears and a scribbled patch on its chest. Above them, a shaky heart. No names. No explanations. But Owen knew. His breath hitched. Atlas stepped forward and sniffed the drawing. Then, without warning, gently licked the faded crayon lines of the dog. For the briefest instant, the beam caught the edge of a small wooden cross wedged in the corner behind the drawing, as if some tiny pair of hands had tried to hide a prayer in a place no one looked. Owen swallowed hard. Somewhere in the middle of horror, a child had believed in rescue. In him, in them, and in something above them both. The silence grew louder. Owen shut the file with a snap, not ready to let the words inside rewire the last 10 years of his life just yet. "We're not done," he said to Atlas quietly. "But we're not breaking here. You hear me?" Atlas's ears twitched at the firmness in Owen's voice. He moved on, following a trail only he understood, nose scraping along the edge of a metal table. On it lay restraints sized for small wrists and ankles. Owen clenched his jaw until it hurt. He found more folders, subjects with numbers instead of names, notes about surgeries, neurological responses, behavioral conditioning. Over and over, the same word appeared in red ink. Failed. He didn't know whether to be relieved or devastated each time he saw it. On a smaller table, half hidden by a dusty sheet, sat a child's plastic cup decorated with faded cartoon stars. Next to it, a hospital bracelet too small for any adult. The ink had smeared, but one letter remained clear. E. Owen slid the bracelet into his pocket, a talisman he did not understand yet, but knew he could not leave behind. Behind him, Atlas suddenly froze. The dog's entire body went rigid, muscle under fur tensing like coiled wire. He let out one sharp bark, then two, each one bouncing off the metal and concrete. "What is it?" Owen straightened, hand instinctively going to his gun. He listened. At first, just the creaks of an old building. Then, a faint hum. An engine. Not close. Getting closer. Headlights flared through a break in the wall boards, cutting across the dark like two white eyes. A vehicle turned into the narrow lane outside. Tires ground over gravel. Atlas moved to the entrance, placing himself slightly ahead of Owen, tail stiff, nose pointed at the door. "We're not alone," Owen muttered. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. The SUV that pulled up outside was dark, windows tinted, engine purring with the smooth menace of something well-maintained and often used to leave scenes like this behind. The driver didn't honk, didn't step out. The engine idled. Owen edged toward the door, staying low, Atlas glued to his side. He peered through the gap. The SUV's front wheels turned slightly, angling toward the warehouse as if it were an animal considering whether to strike or flee. "FBI!" Owen shouted, voice cutting through the air. "Step out of the vehicle, hands where I can see them." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, instead of doors opening, the engine roared. The SUV lunged forward. It wasn't trying to escape down the lane. It was coming straight at the entrance, straight at him. The world compressed into a tunnel. Owen saw the grille, the flashing reflection of his own flashlight on the windshield, the blur of movement behind the glass. His brain shouted at his legs to move. But the shock, the betrayal of seeing someone choose to run him down instead of run away, slowed everything by a fraction of a second. A fraction too long. Atlas didn't hesitate. The German shepherd launched himself sideways into Owen's legs with all his weight, slamming into him with a force that knocked the air out of his lungs. Owen was thrown sideways, his shoulder crashing onto the rough concrete as the front of the SUV plowed through the open doorway. Metal shrieked. Wood exploded into splinters. The vehicle clipped the spot where Owen had been standing barely a heartbeat earlier. Atlas yelped as the edge of the bumper caught his shoulder, spinning him away. The dog hit the ground and rolled, claws scraping for purchase. The sound that tore out of him wasn't the measured bark of a trained canine. It was raw, animal pain. Atlas! Owen's shout broke from somewhere too deep to be professional. He scrambled up, one hand on the floor, the other already reaching for his partner. Atlas struggled to his feet, front leg favoring the injured shoulder, but still placing himself between Owen and the SUV, as if nothing else in the world mattered. Blood darkened the fur near his harness, a red streak screaming against the black. The SUV didn't stop. It swung around in a brutal arc, tires screeching, pointing its rear toward the exit. As it passed, Owen's flashlight caught the back window. For a moment, the tint failed under the angle of the light. A face appeared in the glass. A woman's face, mid-40s, long brown hair framing sharp cheekbones. Eyes the color of storm-stained sky, blue-gray, just like his. A snowflake-shaped scar on her neck glimmered as the light slid across her skin. Elaine, his wife, the woman he had buried 10 years ago. She was looking right at him, not shocked, not guilty, just heartbreakingly sad. Then the SUV shot forward, wheels spitting gravel and dust, tail lights bleeding red into the night. It vanished down the lane, as if the darkness had been waiting to swallow it whole. Owen stood frozen, his breath tearing in and out, the echo of the impact still ringing in his bones. Atlas limped to his side and pressed his head into Owen's hip, as if reminding him he was still here, still alive, still fighting. Owen's hand dropped automatically to the dog's neck, fingers tangling in thick fur. He didn't realize there were tears in his eyes until one fell, hot and disbelieving, onto Atlas's harness. "She's alive," he whispered, voice raw. "She's alive, and she tried to run us down." The warehouse around them felt even more haunted now. Files, x-rays, height charts, the silent witness of what had been done to children. All of it seemed suddenly tied to something far more personal and far more terrifying than he'd allowed himself to believe. Project Dawn wasn't some nightmare that had touched his life once and gone. It was tangled around his family, his past, and whatever future he had left. And somewhere inside that web was a woman he had loved enough to bury, and who had just tried to kill him to keep her, secrets buried instead. Owen breathed in, breathing out slowly as if he were steadying himself before a prayer. He wasn't sure what kind of miracle it would take to untangle all of this, or if he deserved one. But Atlas had bought him another chance with his own body, and someone, somewhere, had drawn a small cross in crayon on a concrete wall and believed that someone would come. Owen wasn't ready to let that faith go to waste. "We're not done," he murmured to Atlas. "Not yet." If you believe in second chances, in angels wearing uniforms and miracles arriving right on time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, so we can keep telling stories of how God still moves in the darkest places. Owen stood in the small, dimly lit interrogation room. His hands braced against the metal table as if the cold surface could steady the storm inside him. Atlas sat close by, the 6-year-old German shepherd leaning slightly into Owen's leg, sensing the strain, tightening his breath. The door opened quietly, and Elena Hart was escorted inside. She looked smaller than she had earlier. Her beige long coat wrinkled, her faded jeans loose at the knees, her dark brown hair tied into a messy knot with strands falling across her cheeks. Her eyes, normally soft and maternal, were swollen and rimmed red from crying. She held her tote bag close to her chest like a shield, the corner of her late son's photograph sticking out of it. She sat down slowly, fingers trembling as she took a breath. "I know you don't believe me," she whispered, voice thin but desperate. "But I never wanted to hurt her. I never touched that child with anything but love." Owen didn't raise his voice. His tone was low, controlled, the tone of a man who'd spent years talking to liars, broken people, and victims who weren't sure which they were. "Elena, you told us she was yours, that you lost her at the mall." Elena shut her eyes, tears spilling instantly. Because I wanted her to be mine. For just a moment. For one day. I wanted to remember what it felt like to hold my son again. She wiped her cheeks with the heel of her palm. "But I didn't steal her. I swear it. Someone gave her to me." Owen exchanged a quiet glance with Atlas. The dog's ears perked, his posture subtly softening, a sign he sensed no aggression from Elena, only grief. Elena continued, gripping the tote strap hard enough for her knuckles to pale. "She came to me outside the shelter. A woman. She wore a long white coat, scarf wrapped around her neck, and she had this presence, calm but urgent, like someone who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for too long." Owen's fingers froze. A white coat, a scarf, a presence familiar. The image flashed like a knife of light inside his chest. What did she look like? Elena shook her head helplessly. I never saw her face clearly. She kept her head down, but her voice was soft, like she was speaking through heartbreak. She swallowed. She said I was the only one she could trust. She said the baby was in danger. She made me promise to keep the child away from FBI hands. Owen felt Atlas shift, letting out a low breath, sensing the spike in his pulse. Elena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. "She gave me this, told me to memorize it, then burn it. I couldn't bring myself to destroy anything connected to that baby." She slid the note toward him with shaking hands. Owen unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was rushed, shaky, feminine. "The child must live. Do not tell Owen." His blood ran cold. Almost mechanically, he sat down, the chair scraping across the floor. "Elena," he asked softly, "how did she know my name?" Elena shook her head, tears sliding down her jaw. "I don't know. But she spoke your name, like she loved it and feared it at the same time." Atlas suddenly lifted his head, eyes fixed on Elena, then turned toward Owen and nudged his arm gently, an action he only made when he sensed someone's truth, not their deception. Elena sobbed harder at the gesture. "I'm telling you everything. I don't want to be her mother anymore. I want her to have the real one, whoever she is." Owen leaned back, the grief inside him folding over itself. He wanted to believe she was lying. He wanted to believe this was random. But nothing about this case had been random. Not the child. Not the bear. Not the name. Not the note. Not the woman in white. Atlas suddenly moved. He rose to his feet in a single, sharp motion, ears pinning forward as if he heard something no one else could. His body grew tense, nostrils flaring, eyes narrowing on the far corner of the ceiling where a faint ventilation hum echoed. A cold shiver ran across Owen's spine. "Atlas, what is it, boy?" The dog stepped back, growling under his breath, a strange mix of warning and grief, before staring directly at the one-way mirror. Owen followed his gaze, heart hammering. For an instant, just an instant, he thought he saw a shadow move behind the glass, the silhouette of a woman with long hair. Then it vanished. Elena cupped her mouth, whispering, "It's her, isn't it? The mother." Owen didn't answer. He couldn't. Something deeper than fear, something closer to recognition, tightened inside him. The dead do not cast shadows, but memories do. And sometimes, so do ghosts of the living. He closed the interrogation. 2 officers were ordered to escort Elena to a temporary holding suite for psychological evaluation. She stood slowly, her movements delicate like someone holding herself together by sheer will. At the door, she turned back. "Agent Rourke, I know you think she's gone, but the woman who gave me that baby, she was not a stranger to you." Then she left, shoulders drawn inward, the hallway swallowing her small, fragile frame. Owen remained still for a long moment, until a nurse sprinted toward him from the pediatric wing, her white sneakers squeaking across the floor. She was in her mid-40s, sturdy build, freckles across her nose, and hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her name tag read, "Nurse Carol Whitman." Her voice shook. "Agent Rourke, there's a problem." Owen's chest clenched. "The baby?" Carol nodded frantically. "She's gone." Owen felt the world tilt. "What do you mean she's gone?" The nurse swallowed hard. "We stepped out for less than a minute. When we returned, the bed was empty. No forced entry. No alarms triggered. It's like she just vanished." Owen rushed down the hallway with Atlas at his side, the German, Shepard's injured shoulder stiff, but his determination strong. They reached the small recovery room, where bright morning light spilled across an empty white bed. But something lay on the pillow, a piece of paper, a drawing. Owen picked it up with numb fingers. It was done in the shaky, uneven strokes of a toddler, a stick figure man, a dog beside him with unmistakably pointed ears and a lightning-shaped patch drawn on its chest, a little girl holding their hands, and behind them, standing far away, was the faint outline of a woman with long hair. At the bottom, the child had scribbled crooked words. "Mommy says Daddy will find me." Owen's breath caught. His vision blurred at the edges. Atlas pressed his muzzle into Owen's hand, offering comfort he couldn't accept. Not yet. Nurse Carol placed a hesitant hand on his shoulder. "Agent Rourke, do you know what this means?" Owen folded the drawing carefully, almost reverently. "It means," he whispered, voice cracking with disbelief and something dangerously close to hope, "she's not done with us." He didn't specify who she was, because he didn't know anymore. A missing child, a haunting memory, a woman in white, a note with his name, and the shadow of someone he buried long ago. The storm was coming, and for the first time in 10 years, Owen felt the faint, impossible warmth of a miracle brushing against his grief. "Atlas," he murmured, steadying himself. "We're not losing her again." The dog lowered his head, eyes burning with loyalty and something like understanding. Together they turned toward the corridor, toward the unknown. At the very end of the hallway, just before the light disappeared into shadow, a quiet gust of air rustled the curtains. Almost like a breath, almost like a whisper. "Find us." And then it was gone. Owen swallowed hard, then spoke to the empty air. "Lord, if you're still listening, don't let me fail this child. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform, where every story reminds us that God still works in the quiet, impossible places." The concrete of the underground parking garage held the day's chill like a secret. Light from the entrance didn't reach this far. It broke against the first row of cars and died into twilight. Down here, every sound echoed longer than it should have. A dropped key, a distant car door, the soft tap of claws on cement. Atlas moved in front, nose low, shoulders rolling under his black and tan coat with a predator's focus. The faint overhead lights brushed across the silver lightning-shaped patch on his chest, the one mark that made him look less like a K9 and more like some creature sent from an older story. Owen Rourke followed a step behind, his breath misting faintly in the cold air, his hand resting on the butt of his service weapon out of habit rather than decision. His Navy FBI jacket was zipped halfway, gray sweater damp at the collar where sweat met cold. He looked like a man pulled between two lives. The agent trained to follow procedure, and the father who had watched his world go into the ground 10 years ago and never truly left the graveside. Atlas stopped. His head snapped up, ears forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not vicious, just certain. He turned his head to the left, toward a cluster of concrete support pillars half hidden behind a row of parked vehicles. Owen felt it before he saw it. The prickle of being watched. The weight of a gaze in the gloom. "Show me, Atlas," he murmured, voice low and hoarse. Atlas stepped forward, each paw placing sound on the floor like punctuation. And then Owen saw her. Ava. She stood near a gray sedan, the hooded figure from the airport stripped of anonymity under the harsh fluorescent light. The gray hoodie was still there, the black leather jacket over it creased and scuffed, black pants dusted with road grit, soft-soled shoes ready to run at any second. Her long dark hair had slipped free from the hood and fell around her shoulders in uneven strands, framing a face that was younger than the terror in her eyes suggested. Her cheekbones were sharp, not from fashion, but from too many sleepless nights, and there was a small, pale scar cutting through her left eyebrow, like someone had once tried to erase her. In her arms, pressed tightly to her chest, was the little girl from the suitcase. Sarah. The pink sleep dress was crumpled and stained, the thin cream blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon that had been torn open and then clumsily taped back together. Her light brown curls were tangled, sticking to her pale forehead, and her small hand clutched the worn pink teddy bear, its fur almost gray with dirt and time. Ava was not running. She was shaking. "Don't come any closer," she said, and her voice came out broken, not like a threat, like a plea. Owen lifted his hand slightly, palms out, the way you would approach someone standing on a ledge. "Ava," he said quietly, tasting the name, binding it to her face instead of the shadowy figure from the security feeds. "You know who I am." Her gaze flicked to Atlas. The dog had stopped halfway between Owen and her, his body taut, tail still, eyes locked on Sarah, not on the woman. Ava swallowed hard. Up close, she looked like someone who had spent a lifetime running in only a few years. "You're the reason she's alive," she whispered. "Both of you. But you're also the reason they'll come faster now." Owen narrowed his eyes. "They who?" Atlas took one step forward, then another. Slow, deliberate. He did something he rarely did in the middle of a tense encounter. He sat. Not the rigid, square sit of a trained K9, waiting for a command, but a softer, almost human kind of sitting, as if he had simply decided to listen first. His head tilted slightly. His ears weren't pinned back in aggression, they were angled forward in concern. For a brief moment, in the cold flicker of neon light, the garage felt less like a crime scene and more like a chapel. Concrete pillars like silent pews, the air heavy with something that wasn't just fear, but a kind of terrified hope. For the first time since the airport, Owen had the strange, unsettling sense that he had not been the one to bring Atlas here. That something larger, something that knew more than he did, had led both of them into this underground sanctuary to hear a confession heaven couldn't bear to keep quiet any longer. "Project Dawn," Ava said, and the name dropped between them like a stone in still water. "You saw the file?" Owen's jaw clenched. "I saw a label, that's all." "You saw enough," she replied. "Dawn isn't a charity. It isn't hope. It's a knife someone decided to call a miracle." She shifted Sarah carefully, cradling the child as if she were made of glass. The little girl stirred, her lashes fluttering but not quite opening, her small fingers tightening slightly around the teddy bear. Ava lowered her eyes to the child's face, and the hardened edges of her features softened into something devastatingly tender. "She wasn't supposed to survive," Ava said quietly. "None of them were." Owen took a slow breath, his chest tight. "Start at the beginning," he said. His voice had that low, dangerous calm of a man who had run out of patience with lies, but still believed in the truth. "And don't skip the parts where my name shows up." Ava huffed out a humorless laugh. "Your name doesn't show up in files, Owen," she said. "That's the problem. You were never meant to see any of this." She looked up, meeting his eyes with a mixture of defiance and remorse. "But hers does." She nodded toward Sarah. "And so does your daughter's." His fingers curled. "Emma is dead." The words came out automatic, like a line he'd rehearsed for a decade. Something to anchor reality, something to keep the ground from shifting. "The car crash. I was there." Ava shook her head slowly, and for a heartbeat the world held its breath. "You were there," she agreed. "But you didn't see what happened after they took her body away." The sentence sliced through Owen like cold steel. A fragment of memory flickered. The white sheet, the hospital corridor, hands on his shoulders holding him back. The way the world had narrowed to a single, sterile hallway that he had never allowed himself to walk down again, even in dreams. Atlas let out a low, heavy whine. He shifted his weight, glancing between Owen and the child, as if the pain in his handler's chest were vibrating inside his own bones. "Project Dawn," Ava continued, voice steadier now, "is a biological program, yes. A study in survival, in resilience, in how far the human body and brain can be pushed and pulled and rewired before either God or nature says enough. It didn't start with children. It ended with them." Her jaw tightened. "Because they were the only ones who survived the early phases long enough for anyone to call it a success." Owen's eyes burned. "You're telling me they experimented on kids?" "I'm telling you," Ava said, "that someone very smart, very broken, decided hardship makes children stronger and wanted to manufacture that strength." She watched him carefully, knowing the next words would hit harder than any blow. "And that someone was your wife." Silence fell. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that amplifies every heartbeat, every breath. In that silence, Owen could hear Atlas breathing. He could hear the soft hum of a ventilation fan. He could hear the faint, distant beep of a car being unlocked somewhere above them. But he could not hear his own thoughts. They had scattered. "Elaine," he forced out, the name tasting like dust on his tongue. Elaine Rourke, the woman with the snowflake scar on her neck and a mind that had always raced ahead of everyone else's. The woman who had once stayed up late at the kitchen table talking about saving children with genetic diseases, about giving kids the future life had stolen from them. The woman he had buried in his heart, in a grave, in a story that at least made sense. Ava nodded. There was no triumph in it, only grief. "She built Dawn to cure," Ava said. "Then they paid her to weaponize it. She realized too late what it had become. So she did the only thing someone like her could think of. She faked her own death, Owen whispered. She tried to burn the lab and herself with it, Ava corrected gently. But they pulled her out before the fire got that far. By the time you arrived at the hospital, the body you saw wasn't hers. They needed you to let go. They needed you to stop asking questions. His vision blurred at the edges. He reached blindly for something solid and found Atlas. The dog stepped closer without being asked, pressing his warm, muscled body against Owen's leg, anchoring him. The silver patch on Atlas's chest brushed the back of his hand like a blessing. "And Emma?" Owen asked, each syllable scraped raw. "What did they do to my daughter?" Ava took a breath so deep it lifted her shoulders. "She was one of the early subjects," she said. "Your wife signed up the families at first, kids with no chance, terminal illnesses. But you know Elaine. She couldn't stop at numbers on a page. She started asking what would happen if a healthy child went through the protocol. She swallowed. Emma was her test, her proof, her obsession." Owen's hand tightened in Atlas's fur. The dog didn't flinch. He just stayed. "They took her from the crash site," Ava said. "Her body was hurt, yes, but not beyond saving. Not with the tools they had. She survived the treatments better than anyone. She became the model they built everything else around. And when Elaine realized what they planned to do with that, she stole Emma back and ran." The words crashed against the one belief Owen had never allowed himself to question, that his little girl had died quickly, before the worst of the pain could find her. Now that comfort dissolved like smoke. "You're lying," he said. But the conviction wasn't there. "You're trying to manipulate me." "If I wanted to manipulate you," Ava said softly, "I would have stayed in the shadows. I wouldn't be standing here, unarmed, holding the only leverage anyone has left in this mess." She looked down at Sarah again. Her. Sarah shifted slightly in Ava's arms, letting out a small, broken sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh. Her eyelids trembled. She nuzzled her face unconsciously against Ava's chest, then against the pink teddy bear, then turned her cheek toward the sound of Owen's breathing. "Why her?" Owen asked. "Why this child? Why the suitcase?" "Because she is the end of the equation," Ava replied. "Sarah is the last successful subject of Project Dawn. The only one who came through the full protocol with her mind intact, her body stable, her empathy untouched." She smiled sadly. "They call that a miracle in the files, the kind you quantify." She shook her head. "Elaine calls it something else. She calls it grace." Owen blinked. "My wife named her." "She asked me to," Ava said. "She said, 'Call her Sarah. He'll understand when the time comes.' She thought when you saw that name, when you saw the pattern, you would look past the badge and into the fire I know is still in you. The one that believes God doesn't waste pain, even if people do." The words landed in a place Owen had boarded up years ago. The part of him that used to pray. The part that had shouted at heaven the night the doctors told him there was nothing more to be done. Atlas exhaled sharply, a soft huff, as if even he recognized that something invisible had just cracked open in his handler's chest. Ava took a small step forward. The concrete seemed to hold its breath with them. "She wanted you to find Sarah," Ava said, "because whoever controls this child controls the proof that Project Dawn works. And whoever controls the proof controls what happens next. Elaine didn't trust the people who funded her. She didn't trust herself. But she trusted you." She swallowed. So she chose the only man she believed would choose the child over the science, even if it meant hating her for the rest of his life. Owen felt like he was standing on a fault line, watching his memories slide out of alignment. Atlas rose from his sit, stepped forward until he stood between the two adults and the child, then looked up at Owen with those deep, amber-flecked brown eyes. It was not a command look. It was a question. What are you going to do? Slowly, Ava extended her arms. The movement was hesitant, reverent. Sarah's small head lolled against her shoulder, the loose curls brushing the worn leather of Ava's jacket. She's been running from men with guns and white coats since before she could speak, Ava said. She's more than a file, more than a subject. I can't keep her safe alone anymore. The words that came next were so quiet, Owen almost missed them. You can. His hands shook as he stepped forward. For a moment he saw himself from far outside his own body. A tired man in a navy jacket, scar on his face, lines at the corners of his blue-gray eyes carved by grief and stubborn survival. A K-9 handler, a federal agent. A father whose definition of loss had just been rewritten. When Ava placed Sarah into his arms, the little girl did something no training, no science, no manipulation could have predicted. She sighed, not a sound of fear, but of relief. The small, aching kind a child makes when they finally reach home. After a long day, they didn't understand. Her tiny hand let go of the teddy bear for a second and found the silver angel pendant hanging against Owen's chest. Her fingers closed around it with surprising strength. "Daddy," she breathed, not questioning this time, just stating something her heart had apparently decided to believe before her mind could catch up. Owen's throat constricted. He pressed his lips to her hairline, smelling hospital antiseptic, old cotton, and something softer underneath. Something like baby shampoo and sleep. "I've got you," he whispered. "I'm here." Atlas stepped closer and lifted his head until his nose brushed Sarah's foot. His tail thumped once, gently, as if promising he would stand watch over this small life until his own ran out. Ava watched them, her dark eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "They won't stop coming," she said quietly. "Not now. Not when they know she's with you." Owen looked up, holding Sarah close. "Then they'll have to go through me," he said. "Through us." Atlas's ears flicked in agreement. From somewhere deeper in the garage, a soft sound echoed, heels on concrete, slow, unhurried. A figure emerged from behind a row of parked cars, moving into the edge of the light. A woman, wearing a long white coat that brushed just above her knees, a dark dress beneath it, and a scarf wrapped around her neck as if guarding something fragile. Her hair was long and brown, falling over her shoulders in waves that time and stress had not fully tamed. She walked like someone who had been on her feet all her life, in labs and corridors and late-night emergencies. But there was a hesitation in each step now, as if she no longer trusted the ground to hold her. "Owen," she said. And the way she said his name cut through 10 years as if they were 10 minutes. Her voice trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of everything she had kept buried. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "I have never left you." Owen turned, every part of him screaming that this was impossible, that this was cruel, that this was holy. The light did not quite reach her face. He saw the outline of her jaw, the familiar tilt of her head, the shadow of the snowflake scar beneath the scarf. He felt Sarah's heartbeat against his chest, Atlas pressed tight against his thigh, Ava's breath catching across the space between them. And for the first time in a decade, standing in a concrete cave under a world that had lied to him, Owen Rourke found he could not decide whether this moment was a nightmare finally catching up to him, or a miracle God had been quietly preparing all along. If this story touches your heart and reminds you that God still writes miracles in the darkest places, please like, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform so we can share more stories of grace, hope, and second chances. In every moment of darkness, there is a light that refuses to die. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a child's whisper, sometimes in the loyalty of a devoted dog, and sometimes in the quiet courage of a wounded soul who still chooses to love. If this story touched your heart, remember this: miracles are not always loud. Often, they hide in the smallest acts of protection, kindness, and faith. The same faith that carries us through our own valleys. May God watch over you and your family, guide your steps, strengthen your spirit, and remind you that no one walks alone. If you believe in hope, in second chances, and in the grace that God sends into our lives, please share this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Your voice helps these stories reach someone who may desperately need a reminder that miracles still happen, and God is always near.